Back in the autumn of 2011, amidst the lingering shadows of a global recession, I found myself signing the papers for a quaint, old cottage in the heart of Wales. As a single man working in a rotating shift pattern, days turning into nights and nights back into days, the solitude of my new home seemed ideal. Little did I know, my life was about to take a turn into the inexplicable. The first few weeks passed without incident. But then, things began to happen, small occurrences that I initially brushed off as the product of sleep deprivation. One evening, after a particularly grueling night shift, I remember placing a book on my bedside table, only to find it later on the living room couch. I lived alone, the doors were always locked and the windows sealed. I laughed it off, blaming my tired mind. However, the occurrences grew stranger and more frequent. There was the night I heard footsteps in the attic when I was clearly alone in the house. The attic, which was always locked and seldom visited, seemed to come alive with the scuttle of unseen feet. Then, there was the chilling evening when the temperature in my bedroom plummeted, my breath turning to mist, and I felt an unseen hand brush against my cheek. The most terrifying incident happened on a cold December night. Returning home at around 3 a.m., I pushed open my front door, only to be met with a freezing gust of wind, though every window was shut tight. I flicked on the hallway light, and for a split second I saw it, a large, shadowy figure looming at the end of the corridor. My heart raced, every instinct screamed for me to flee, but I was frozen in place. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow dissipated, days turned into weeks, and the events escalated. Objects would move, doors would slam shut, and once, a painting flew off the wall, narrowly missing me. I sought explanations. Maybe the house was settling, perhaps it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew these weren't just coincidences. One night, the phenomenon reached a peak. Lying in bed, I heard a voice, a woman's voice, soft yet filled with an indescribable sadness, murmuring from the shadows, "No, please, I can't trust them." The sorrow in her tone was palpable. I scoured the house, turning on every light, but found nothing. No one. Unable to bear it any longer, I confided in a neighbor, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Davies. His eyes widened with recognition as I recounted my experiences. He revealed that the previous occupants, a young couple, had fled the house for similar reasons. The wife had always complained of feeling watched, of hearing whispers in the night. I couldn't stay any longer. Within 6 months, I sold the cottage, taking a financial hit but relieved to leave the eerie occurrences behind. The new owners, a young family, never mentioned anything unusual, and I never asked. Sometimes, I wonder if it was all real or just a figment of my imagination, but the fear and the memories are as vivid as ever. I haven't experienced anything like it since, and I often avoid talking about it, fearing disbelief or ridicule. But that old Welsh cottage and its unseen inhabitants will forever linger in the back of my mind, a chilling reminder of the unexplainable mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. In the icy grip of winter where I lived, the air was so cold it could take your breath away. During this frostiest season, it had become a cherished family ritual to escape to our beloved ski lodge, nestled in the snowy embrace of the mountains. However, that particular year marked a departure from our tradition. I was 16 then, navigating the tumultuous waters of adolescence. I had developed a rather rebellious streak, often acting petulantly and defying my parents at every turn. But an incident was looming on the horizon, one that would irrevocably alter my perspective. The day before our scheduled departure to the northern ski haven, I found myself embroiled in a trivial yet heated argument with my father. In a fit of obstinacy, I declared my refusal to accompany the family, secretly hoping this would derail the entire trip. I was aware that my decision would disappoint my younger siblings, yet my desire to infuriate my father overshadowed this. Unexpectedly, my father, with a calm demeanor, stated that I was mature enough to fend for myself. Thus, he deemed it acceptable to leave me at home alone. This caught me off guard. Despite my prior bravado about being self-sufficient, The prospect of being alone filled me with a creeping sense of dread. It seemed my father was attempting to impart a life lesson, but I was too stubborn to back down. Remarkably, he managed to persuade my mother, and they, along with my siblings, set off without me. As their car disappeared from view, I was engulfed by an overwhelming sense of solitude, and tears involuntarily streamed down my face. Determined to salvage the situation, I resolved to exact revenge by indulging in unrestrained freedom. Our house, grand in scale, seemed the perfect venue for an impromptu party. However, plans fell through, and only a handful of friends arrived. The afternoon passed in a mundane blur of snacks and idle chatter, and soon I was alone once more. Our neighbors, a kind couple around my parents' age, paid a visit that evening. Their concern for my well-being was palpable, yet oddly they never inquired about my family's whereabouts. This struck me as peculiar, as I wasn't aware they knew of my family's absence. As night descended, the house transformed into a cavernous, silent space, amplifying my sense of isolation. For the first time, I was acutely aware of the vastness of our home, with its multiple rooms and expansive basement. The emptiness felt oppressive, heightening my unease. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence was shattered by a faint, unsettling noise. Initially, I dismissed it as wildlife rummaging outside, a common occurrence that my father usually handled. However, the realization that I was alone spurred me into action. Creeping downstairs, I was hit by a wave of fear, yet propelled by a sense of duty to maintain the house's order. As I neared the front door, armed with my brother's baseball bat, a chilling sound stopped me in my tracks. The distinct noise of drawers being rifled through. It emanated from my father's study, a room that was always meticulously organized and off-limits. My heart raced as I pieced together the horrifying truth. An intruder was inside our home. Peeking into the study, I locked eyes with a tall figure sifting through my father's documents. My father, a judge, often dealt with sensitive cases, and the breach of his private space suggested a sinister motive. Panic took over, and I bolted upstairs, the intruder's footsteps thundering behind me. In a frenzy, I secured myself in my room and dialed my father's number. Frantic, I conveyed the terrifying situation. My father's immediate response and rapid footsteps through the phony offered a glimmer of hope. As the intruder made his way upstairs, my father's voice resonated with urgency and concern. A series of loud noises, followed by a tense silence, filled the air. Finally, my father's voice, a reassuring balm, asked if I was safe. I flung open my door and collapsed into his arms, his presence a fortress against my fears. The police arrived shortly, conducting their inquiries and departing. In the aftermath, my father revealed that the smart home security system had alerted him to the intrusion, prompting his swift return. The journey from the hotel near the airport to our home, typically a 20-30 minute drive, was accomplished in a mere 7 minutes by my father in his desperate race to protect me. The intruder, it turned out, had no connection to my father's legal work. The motives remained shrouded in mystery, leaving me to ponder the randomness of the event. This harrowing experience not only reshaped my relationship with my father, but also taught me the value of family and the precarious nature of safety within the walls we call home. The year was 2012, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the house was silent. Living in a bustling household with 2 brothers, a sister, and my parents usually meant a constant buzz of activity. But on that particular evening, everyone was out. I was 21, a university student, and savored these rare moments of solitude. My parents were celebrating their anniversary at a dinner, planning to stay overnight at a hotel, while my siblings were scattered at friends' places or activities. I spent the evening lounging in my room, indulging in a movie marathon. Afterward, I had a long chat with my girlfriend over the phone, something we did often. As the night deepened, I realized I was hungry. Checking the time, it was already close to midnight. I decided to whip up something simple. Spaghetti seemed like a good idea. In the kitchen, I set the pasta to boil and decided to crack open one of my father's bottles of red wine. He had a collection that I occasionally dipped into. Just as the wine poured into the glass, the landline rang. It was odd, given the late hour, but I thought it might be my mom or dad checking in, or perhaps my sister needing a ride. Answering the phone, I was met with static and a faint, odd sound, like distant wind. "Hello?" I asked, but there was no response. Assuming a bad connection, I hung up and returned to the kitchen. But then, the phone rang again. Annoyed but curious, I answered. This time, the line was clearer, but all I could hear was what sounded like soft breathing, as if someone was holding the phone slightly away from their mouth. The third call was what really unsettled me. This time, I didn't speak, I just listened. The breathing was more pronounced, and I could swear I heard a faint whisper, but couldn't make out any words. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I hung up, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it a prank, a wrong number, or something more sinister? I tried to shake off the feeling and focus on my late dinner. That's when I saw the flashing lights through the kitchen window, blue and red, urgent and bright. Stepping outside, I saw emergency vehicles parked outside the house across the street. My neighbor, Mr. Thompson, an elderly gentleman who lived alone, often waved a friendly hello but kept to himself. As I stood there, trying to process the scene, there was a knock on my door. 2 paramedics stood there, explaining that Mr. Thompson had been found unresponsive in his home. He had called emergency services, complaining of chest pain, but had become unresponsive during the call. The realization hit me like a wave. Were those calls from Mr. Thompson? Was he trying to reach out for help? The guilt and confusion swirled in my mind. I could have perhaps done something, called for help sooner, or at least tried to check on him. I never found out if those calls were indeed from him, and I didn't share this with anyone. The weight of the what-ifs was heavy. Mr. Thompson's house was eventually sold, and new neighbors moved in. But those mysterious calls, and the tragic event that followed, stayed with me, a haunting reminder of how fleeting and fragile life can be.